Hi, Dan here, Scootering Magazine, back for the final instalment of the jetting series we've been doing. If you haven't seen parts 1 and 2, please do go back and review them, because if you watch this one part in isolation, it will probably raise a lot of questions which could be answered just by simply watching parts 1 and 2. But in essence, what I've done is a series of 3 videos just to highlight what I feel is the fact that the PHBH carbs are quite often overlooked and underrated by scooterists, and I think because they're so readily available and in such wide use, people sort of tend to take them for granted, and they're always looking for more exotic or otherwise, intricate setups, and quite often what they're looking for is right under their noses. The PHBH gives a good balance of performance, miles per gallon, quality of build, cost to buy, and availability of parts to rejet it and information to help you perform that rejetting. So I think it's a largely underrated carb. Out of the box though, brand new from Dellorto, it doesn't come with anything that really resembles what you would want to be using in a Vespa or Lambretta scooter. And if you haven't got the knowledge to do the jetting yourself, or you aren't able to get to a dyno centre to help you with that, then hopefully these series of videos will help you get into the ballpark settings for you to work from, which is something far more meaningful than what comes in the carb out of the box. The first thing to do though, no matter what scooter you're going to apply it to, is when you get it out of the box, have a look inside, and they usually, Dellorto fit them with a 200 float jet. That's the valve that operates the floats within the carb, and they usually fit a 200, and take that straight out and fit a 300. It's not something which is immediately apparent when you first start jetting it, or even sometimes on the dyno, but when you're out on a long run on the motorway or whatever, and the commands of the engine are taking a lot of fuel out of the bowl, it can often run dry, so you will want to fit a 300 float jet. Float valve in there. Also, the fuel tap on your scooter, whatever scooter that is, it should be a fast flow tap, and it should be flowing around 1 pint per minute. If it's a little bit less than that, it's not a big deal. If it's a lot less than that, it is a big deal. So at that point you'll want to take the tap out of the tank, clean the tank out, clean the tap out, and make sure it's all flowing properly. In order to do that test, you want to get a receptacle at roughly the same height as the carb, get the pipe coming down from the tank, put the pipe into the receptacle, and just turn the tank on. Let it run for a minute and measure how much you've got. And as I say, if it's much less than a pint, have a look at why and what you can do to remedy that. On Lambrettas, I don't recommend fuel pumps under any circumstances unless it's in something like a race environment. And on Vespas, I don't recommend fuel pumps unless you have got a long-range tank fitted, in which case the bottom of your petrol tank sits lower than the top of your carburettor, and then you get header pressure issues, and even though you've got fuel in the tank, the carb will run dry. You can buy a fuel tank, and it's a long time since I've bought one of these, and I think it was from SIP, but forgive me if I'm wrong there, but it was a long-range fuel tank for Vespas, and it had a fuel pump fitted to it at the bottom, and that fuel pump that they fitted at the bottom obviously was one which was specific for that job. So rather than getting a separate fuel pump which was made perhaps for the motorcycle industry or something else, this one was just the right pressure for the Vespa, so that it didn't really affect the jetting too much, and you could still run similar jets to what you would have done, but it just got the fuel up to the level it needed to be at. The other thing is that I don't recommend air filters. I don't like them. I think they're unnecessary complications that cause more problems than they solve. If you're really concerned, because most guys running with a panel on who haven't got a hole in the panel haven't got really too much to worry about in terms of debris going in there. I'm not saying it's never going to happen, but it's not so much of a worry. If you're on a cut down scooter or you've got a huge hole in the panel, I can understand your concern, but if you've got a huge hole in the panel, you don't want a filter sticking out of it. If you really want to put something on underneath the panels, you can put the rubber elbow on, but without the filter at the top, and that will sort of give you some of the coverage. But on the whole, I built the majority of engines that I built, unless the customer really insisted, I built without filters and never had any problems. The other thing to cover is to match the right carb to the right kit. So if you've got, a touring tune to a cylinder and a touring pipe, you don't want a 34mm flat slide or a 35mm McCuney or a big 39mm race carb. You want a carb that brings out the best of the tune and the setup that you've got. So you want to be looking at sort of 26s, 27s, 28s, 30s, that sort of thing, if you're going to go for a touring tune. And the lower the state of tune your scooter is, probably the better off you are down that. So a 26 would be better on something like a 200 with a Clubman than, say, a 30 on a TS1 with an expansion pipe. So, you know, try and choose your carb accordingly. But the PHBH, and if you're really, really wanting to go on something very economical and really basic, and you've got an otherwise bog standard, say, Lambretta, and you just want to get something a bit better than the standard carb that's on it, a 25mm PHBL. But the 25mm PHBL is a very, very different carb to the 26, 28 and 30 PHBH. So the jetting that I'm about to give in these examples doesn't apply. In terms of jetting, you'll already know if you've seen the other videos, I recommend a base setting for you to start your plug chops and dialing in and row tests with as a 55 Pilot, an AV266 atomizer, an X13 needle on the second clip, 40 slide, 300 float valve, and then main jet to suit, which I'm going to give you some examples of in a minute. I've got 11 Vespas, 8 different Lambrettas, and even within those, I'll tell you which ones they also translate across to for other examples. Once you've got those base settings in, you can do certain things, like if the AV266 isn't rich enough, you can go up to an AV268, but in that case you wouldn't want to run the 40 slide, it's too rich. You'd want to go to a 50 slide, which will just crispen up the bottom end, but still giving you the main mid-range benefits of the 268. The 264 atomizer is often too lean, and the X7 needle is often too lean. On anything other than a bog standard 200cc scooter, whether that be a PX200 or a Lambretta with box type exhaust, so Clubman or original Piaggio exhausts, and running that very basic setup, unless you're running something really detuned, you will, want to be going up to the AV266 and the X13, and it's only when you go down to that really low state of tune that you have to go down to those leaner settings. If at all possible, avoid putting the AV264 and the X7 needle together in whatever setting you do, because 9 times out of 10 they can be problematic. And if you have to do it, you just simply cannot get anything richer in there. Make sure that the the X7 needle is on at least the 2.5 clip setting, and by that I mean that it's on the second clip, and then you put half space shim underneath the setting before you pop it into the slide. So those are the base settings. I'm going to give you some examples now of how those translate to actual scooters that I have jetted on my dyno at the Scooterotica garage. And I'll start off with the Vespas, and I've got some interesting ones here. I've got everything from a T5 on an MB 170 cast iron old school tune up to Quatrinni's, Parma kits and Malossis and all sorts. So you'll have to forgive me. I'm going to put my glasses on to read this out, but here we go. So on this one we've got a T5, and it's an MB tuned old school conversion on a 170 running a 30mm Dellorto, a SIP tour pipe, and unless I state otherwise, assume it's running, all of these will be running 300 taps, no filter and 40 slide, unless I specify otherwise. And this T5 on the MB 170 with a SIP tour pipe was running a 55 Pilot AV266, and we had to take him up beyond the X13. In this case, we went to the X2 needle, but because we went up to the X2 needle, we couldn't run him on the second clip. We had to come down to a 1.5 setting, so that was the top clip with a half space shim underneath it. We took him up to a 150 main on that, and that is quite big, but that's because of the state of tune that was on the cylinder. The next one along was a Malossi P210. So this is a very, very common kit used on the Vespa P200s, and I've got a couple of examples of the same kit but with different carbs on. So this one, he's got the Malossi P210, he's got a 28mm carb, the SIP road pipe, which is a very popular road pipe, and he's got the standard crank with no work done to the casings. So the casings and the crank are in a very low state of tune, but he's put quite a sort of performance kit on it, and a 28mm carb, so he's hoping to get some basically slightly better than average performance from what you would have got from a stock cylinder. 55 Pilot, AV264. We had to go down to the leaner atomizer in that case. We started off on the AV266, went down to the 264 because he's got the standard inlet and the standard casings and it wasn't commanding the fuel. But he still remained on the X13 needle, and because he was on the AV264, we didn't keep him on the second clip. Again, we put a half shim in there and put him up to 2.5 clip setting. And he finished on a 125 main. And I will explain the difference as to why he's on a 125 and the previous guy was on a 150 when I get to the end of this article, and you'll understand the difference between reed valves and cylinder sizes and other things. So the next Vespa is a T5. This is a 172 Malossi with a reed valve. It's on a 30mm Dellorto with a SIP left-hand pipe, 55 Pilot, AV266, X2 needle. So we had to take him up to the rich needle because he's now on the reed valve with some work done to the casings and all the rest of it, commanding a lot of fuel. So he's on the 2.5 clip setting. He was kicking out 18 horsepower and he was on a 142 main. So the 172 kit with a reed valve is again quite a common setting. So with a 30mm, that's also quite common settings again. Now down the other end of the spectrum, in the Vespa ranges, the PX166, again that little cast iron kit, very, very popular. JL right hand pipe, another one, like very similar to the revolver pipes. Standard crank again on this, and standard crank casings, so only small inlet duration, but good little kit and good pipe. 30mm carb matched up to it, 55 Pilot, AV266, X2 needle on the second clip, 50 slide on that one, so he'd gone up to the richer atomizer, but the richer needle, but because of that we'd had to give him a little bit of cleaning up lower down the rev range, so we went to the 50 slide. And he only had a 120 main in that, and that's because he had a standard crank and standard casings. Now this was a bit of a fruity scooter. This was a 210 Malossi with, you used to see a lot of these, people really lusted after these a few years ago. The Worb 5 tuned Malossi 210. This was running with a Revy PM pipe, reed valve, 60mm crank, 30mm carb, 55 Pilot, AV266, X2 needle, second clip, 40 slide, 142 main, kicking out 18 horsepower. So again, very, very basic settings there. Just had to go up slightly richer on the needle again, and I think that's due to the fact that he's got the Worb 5 tune, the 60mm crank, and the reed valve fitted, so it's commanding a little bit of extra fuel, so he needs the X2 needle instead of the X13. Back down again to a 172 Malossi on a T5. This one's been reed valved, Revy PM pipe, 30mm carb, 16 horsepower, very typical sort of power delivery from that kit. 55 Pilot, AV266 atomizer, X13 needle on the second clip, 40 slide, 138 main. So every single one of those is ticking the box there of what you would expect for your base settings to work from, and it was only really the main jet that needed dialing in on that one. Back up to the P210s here. This is the Malossi 210. And he's running a race crank, so it's got increased inlet, not a reed valve, but just increased inlet duration. He's running a Revy PM pipe and 30mm Dellorto carb. So he had to go up to this because he's increased inlet timing. We put him up to 58 Pilot. So, you know, I've spoken before in the other videos about not going below a 55, and in some cases, like this is one, and the Ron Moss kit was another on the Avanti when we come to the Lambrettas. We used to go up to 60s on those. So 58 Pilot on that, AV266, X2 needle on the second clip, 40 slide and a 130 main. He was kicking out 21 horsepower, so that was a healthy little Malossi conversion with fairly typical jetting in again. Parma kit, the Parma 130 on the little Vespa there, 30mm carb with a Leo Vince exhaust. So this was quite a fruity little thing for a 130, 15 horsepower. 55 Pilot, AV266, X2 needle, third clip, 140 main, and a 40 slide. So right across the board there, other than the needle which went up a bit richer. Again, very, very similar jetting to what I'm outlining as your starting point, and just tweaking it up where you need to once you've done your plug chops, or in my case, run it up on the dyno. Polini 210, another popular touring kit, 60mm carb, 60mm crank, that was the race crank fitted with a reed valve, so a Polini 210 with a 60mm race crank and a reed valve. JL, the old Nordspeed style pipe here, no filter, 30mm Dellorto, 55 Pilot. He's got the race crank and the reed valve here, and with that pipe it was really commanding the fuel. So instead of the AV266, we took him up to the 268, but remained on the X13 needle, second clip, 40 slide, 300 tap, as per all the others. 18 horsepower, and we finished up on a 140 main once we'd done his final dialing in for the full throttle. Last couple of Vespas now. Quatrinni 172. This had a rear-facing reed valve fitted to it, done by Scooterfactory Garage. It had a Sean Brady cut crank. You might have seen some of Sean's cranks on the on Facebook or on other websites. How he heavily modifies those. This one had a curly pipe, Varitronic fitted, 23 degrees ignition coming down to 15 at full chat. 30mm Dellorto carb, PHBH, no filter. Again, running on the 40 slide with a 300 tap. It's got the 55 pilot, an AV266 atomizer. It's a bit more of a sporty thing with the reed and the cut crank, so it was an X2 needle on the second clip. 140 main. Okay, so hopefully seeing a pattern here now developing. And the last one on the Vespas is the Quatrinni 200. That's the M8 Quatrinni pipe on an M2 cylinder with a Falk clutch on a Quatrinni casing with the Vespatronic ignition, and that was, I think it was a 67 bore by 57 stroke. 30 horsepower this little fruity number kicked out. I believe that one belonged to Stefan Manoli, I think, that one that we did. That was 55 pilot, AV268 atomizer, so we went up richer because of the performance of that little kit. It was a 30 horsepower kit on little casings. So AV268, but still on the X13 needle, 2.5, so that's the second clip with a half clip spacer underneath it, 40 slide, 300 tap, 145 main. So those are the Vespa ones. I'll whiz through the Lambretta ones now, and then I'll sort of recap as to what the pattern is and therefore what the brackets are if you're running a particular style. And there's like what I would call three main categories which apply to both Lambretta and Vespa. So on the Lambretta one, we've got the TS1 240. This was a 62mm crank on an NK tour pipe, no filter, mild touring tune. I did this one for a chap called Bryn Allsop, lovely fella and his good lady. I think, I was trying to remember how long ago it was I did this. I think it was about 6 years ago. Spoke to Bryn the other day. He said it hasn't missed a beat since and it's still running great. This was a 30mm PHBH on a TS1 240 NK tour pipe, 55 pilot, AV266, X2 atomizer, X2 needle with a 2.5 clip setting, 300 on the tap jet, 40 on the slide, 135 on the main. Okay. Conversely, there was a TS1 with the same NK tour pipe that didn't have the touring tune. That was down to 20 horsepower. Well, it was 19 horsepower. Still on the 55 pilot, still on the AV266, but wasn't commanding the same amount of fuel in the mid-range. So he was on an X13 needle, second clip, 138 main. Okay. Moving on to the RB225. This was on the, do you remember the ADS pipes that Chisel Speed were doing? This was their mid, like the middle of they had the tour, the mid and the race. This was the mid. It had Nemtech on it, ignition, no filter, 300 tap, 40 slide, 30mm Dellorto, 55 pilot. This was a fat pipe, these, and they do command a bigger chunk in the mid-range where all the torque was on these pipes. So he went up to an AV268 on that. But because it was commanding that, to get him crispy down the bottom end, we had to get him on the X7 needle. So that was one of the rare combinations where I went to the X7 needle. But as I said before, I mixed it with the AV268 atomizer. And because I don't like the 1/8 throttle setting on an X7 needle, I put him on the third clip just to raise that out. So that kept that nice and tidy all the way through, and he finished on a 145 main. That was a 22 horsepower touring setup. RB20, the little revy thing. Now this guy had made a mistake. He'd got an ADS race pipe. Now the ADS race pipe was only ever good, in my opinion, on the bigger capacity, the bigger CC RBs, the 250 specifically. It was really good on. Once you came down to the 200, the 200 didn't have the mid-range to boost up the torque, so it was often very lacking down the bottom end. But this guy came with it. He had the RB20 with the ADS race pipe, no filter, 28mm Dellorto. He had a 57 pilot on it, so slightly richer again on the pilot. AV268 because of the mid-range command on those pipes. They were very fat pipes. But again, back on the X13 needle, second clip, 135 main. Then we went to a Rapido, something a bit old school here, a 200 Classic. He had a Sterling pipe, I tuned this one. It had 177 exhaust, 122 transfer, 160 inlet. It was a touring tune. It kicked out 18 horsepower, no filter, 300 tap, 40 slide, 55 pilot, AV264. So it's a piston port, not commanding as much fuel. Went down to the 264 atomizer, but kept the X13 needle, and we just sweetened it up a bit on the third clip. So a bit richer on the clip, a bit leaner on the atomizer. 125 main. That's very typical of those kits, 125 main. I'll come back to that in a minute. Last couple of Lambrettas. BGM RT195 kit. This was owned by a chap called Gary Inglis, another nice chap, another good customer of ours. MB Clubman, no filter, 30mm Dellorto. It was only kicking out 14 horsepower. It wasn't in a great state of tune. We hadn't built it, but it's a nice little kit, reliable, did what he wanted. 55 pilot, 40 slide, 300 tap, AV264 atomizer, X13 needle, second clip, 125 main. Okay, so those RT kits do not command a lot of fuel, neither that. Strange enough, the RT225 wasn't much of a better performer than the RT195. The RT195 gave better bang for buck and jetted almost the same as the RT225, which I've got one here, the BGM 225 on a TSR pipe this time, so an expansion chamber, 17 horsepower, so a couple of horsepower more than Gary's 195, but still on a 30mm Dellorto, 55 pilot, AV264 atomizer, X13 needle, 125 main, but that one, because it was a bigger CC, it went up to the third clip on the X13 needle instead of the second clip. Last Lambretta, an Avanti 225. M-Tech fitted, ignition, 22 degrees down to 15, DevTour pipe, no filter, 30mm Dellorto, 40 slide, 300 tap, 60 pilot. They needed a big pilot, those things. They liked it. AV26 atomizer, as I said before, X13 needle, as I said before, second clip, 20 horsepower kit, 125 main. Okay, so those were a selection of settings, and if you hadn't already spotted it, this is the crux of the matter. Whether it's Lambretta or Vespa, if you're working on a basic, standard cast iron kit, whether that's a P200 or a cast iron 200 Lambretta, if you've got a box style pipe, a Clubman, that sort of thing, and you're running a 30mm Dellorto carb on it or something of that nature, 28mm Dellorto, you'll use those base settings that I've given you, and the pilot will run between a 120 and a 125 usually. Okay? If you've pepped it up a bit and you've gone up to, say, a stage 4 tune on the Lambretta, and you've now fitted, you've got rid of your Clubman pipe and you're now fitting something like a JL on the Vespa or a Sterling pipe on the Lambretta. Those were very common. Stage 4 200s and 225s with a Sterling pipe and a 30mm Dellorto was so common that we tuned. And on the same token, the P200 with a JL right-hander and a 30mm Dellorto, that was incredibly common. And again, you'd see the same base settings that I've given you, but the main jets would then go up to, instead of 120 to 125 for the box pipes, they'd go start at the 125 and go up to the 130s now, on both the Vespa and Lambretta. Now, once you go a step beyond that and you start to do performance things, so let's say you still stay with a fairly basic kit, but you reed valve it. So in the case of a Lambretta, that might be a cast iron stage 4 kit, but now you've revalved it. You've still got the Sterling pipe on, but instead of it now being a 125 to 130, you're going to go 130 to 140 on your main jet, because now at the top end, that kit is now, well, the reed valve is making it command a much larger amount of fuel. And the same applies, say, if you were running a Polini on the Vespa, and you've put a pipe on it like a JL right hander or something, but you've reed valved it, 130 to 140 is commanding more fuel. And then up at the biggest end of the spectrum for these carbs and on these sorts of kits, something like a TS1 or in the Vespa equivalent, a Malossi 210, I would see very similar jetting. If you were seeing a Malossi 210 with a JL right-hander and a TS1 with a JL right-hander, you'd see almost identical jetting in them both. And that would be your 55 pilot, your AV266 atomizer, X13 needle, second clip, 40 slide, 300 tap, no air filter, and a 135 to 150 main, depending what the other variables were, like had you ported it, had you, tuned it in some way. And the more tuned up it was, the more fuel it commanded. So that's when you see the 150 jets running, as in some of the examples I gave you earlier. So I hope that's given you a bit more to work with now. If you've got any more questions, please go back and watch the other 2 videos first. The PHBH is a good all-round carb. It's value for money. It's easy to jet. There's some very common base settings that you can use to work from. My advice is always start with those settings. Do plug chops, do road tests, go as rich as you can, and when it's too rich in one particular area, back it off. Then move on to the next stage, and keep doing that as you work through the carb, pushing every part of it as rich as possible, and then backing off slightly. And you'll end up with a reliable setup, a safe setup, and something that's common, easy to work with, gives a good balance of performance, miles per gallon, and you know, value for money when you're buying it. I hope you've enjoyed the series. If you've got any more questions, or there's something I've missed out and you want to see another installment to this, looking at it from a different angle, or perhaps a different range of carbs, if you're interested in the 35mm TMXs and the 34mm flat slide Dellortos and that sort of thing, and you want to hear some jetting examples from those, or applications I would put those on, then please leave the comments, let me know, and hopefully we can bring you some more information. Alright, that's all for now. Hope you've enjoyed it. See you on the next video.